coming. I'm really excited to be giving this workshop today. I think have we done 4 now with the research office? And what we saw last year is the people that had gone through this messaging workshop and thinking about communications were really kind of stepped up in terms of media. There were loads of LinkedIn, loads of Lens articles last year, and loads of Teach Space articles. So it was just really wonderful to see the Monash education out in the media, having those really important discussions around online learning, around mental health during the epidemic last year. But what I thought I'd do is I thought I might kick off with a little bit of my story, because this is about getting your messaging out there and getting your research out there. And the story that I want to talk to you guys about today is just a really little tiny moment in time when I did my careers value homework that I set all you guys. Not surprisingly, because it comes up every single time I do it, making a difference through storytelling is always in my top 5 list of career values and my career goals. So I wanted to tell you a little story about the time that I really thought that made an impact. And this was about 20 years ago, and I remember it very, very clearly. It was at an exhibition that I had that was opening at the Malthouse called Connections, which was an exhibition I did about the connections made between refugees and Australians. And I had created that exhibition after getting quite upset and very cross looking at John Howard talk about refugees in order to win votes during what was called the Tampa election. I had heard that a friend of mine in San Francisco, after September 11, he was Muslim. His shop had been firebombed. And I thought, wow, this is going to happen in Australia, this real anti-Muslim sentiment. And I wanted to do something about it. And in my own family, amongst family and friends, there was also this kind of real reticence to talk about refugees, and people were calling them queue jumpers. It was a very kind of, what felt like a very volatile time. It kind of feels quite benign now, but it felt very volatile. So I created this exhibition about the connections made between refugees and Australians. And I thought, what are the different kinds of connections that we make? So I featured stories about love and stories about friendship and stories about sport and work and advocacy, and interview people from all over Victoria. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, you know, the 2 key people that I really want to be able to affect change with for this exhibition to have impact, the audience that I was thinking about, were my mum, who never agrees with me about politics, and my mother-in-law, who lives in rural Queensland and believes everything that a current affair says. And so it was the launch of my exhibition, and all the people that I'd featured had come to it. It was at the Malthouse. It was Refugee Week. And I looked over and I saw my mother-in-law talking to Joseph and Barbara, who were 2 people that I had featured about support. Joseph was a man from Sri Lanka who was seeking asylum, who didn't have anywhere to live, and he didn't have any means of supporting himself because he was on a bridging visa. And Barbara had helped him make phone calls home and was that kind of Australian friend. And I had brought to life this story for my mother-in-law, and I saw her kind of heart shift in that moment. And I remember it thinking, okay, it doesn't matter what else happens with this exhibition. It doesn't matter which media it gets picked up by, but I've made a difference today. I've made an impact because I've been able to open a conversation that wasn't really effective and wasn't really able to be had. And that moment and moments like that throughout my career have been a real driver. And they're the things that keep me doing the annoying things that I don't particularly like, because ultimately having that impact is one of those things that helps me make decisions around my career and also make decisions around where my attention goes. So that was my little impact story. It's a little bit of a why I do the work that I do. And I'm just wondering if anyone might be able to kind of reflect on what values that you came out, or what moments in time that you've had around the impact that you've made, or where you've thought you're really living your values in your career and your research. I might nominate, Laura, can you think of a moment in time like that for you?
Thanks, Lara.
No worries.
I can actually, as you were talking, it made me think of, I mean, you're probably across my projects as well as anyone else, Lara. The intergenerational project with, we brought together University of the Third Age members with some primary school students in Frankston. And essentially we brought them together in order to explore resources that supported their health in their local community, but doing it together had a real impact beyond the educative value. You know, the data was probably the most powerful I've ever collected in terms of making an impact and making a difference. You know, for the older people, they both felt stereotyped, and they stereotyped the young children in Frankston. And doing this work together broke down the barriers and the fear and the stereotypes in ways that they hadn't had an opportunity to do in the past. They spoke very articulately about how that project in isolation had allowed them to connect with people, both of their own generation and the younger kids, and how that impact their health. And yeah, so that's a snippet of my story, I think.
I think the thing that I remember about that that story, Laura, is that we took some photographs and created a video out of it. And I think the video cost more than the grant we got from the local government in retrospect. But it really, like, you actually saw that connection happening in the video, right?
Yeah.
And so that even if it was a 15-second video, you could see intergenerationally where those conversations were happening. You could see that change that had happened. And I thought that was a really powerful way of being able to talk to that research as well. Has anyone else got a story like that they would like to share?
I'm happy to throw something in, Lara. I think speaking from a perspective of a teacher and speaking from a perspective of a researcher, so for a long time I was a secondary teacher, and one of the things that we talked about was that impact can be a very long way away, or change can be a very long way away from what happens every day in the classroom. It's a kind of intangible in a way. And so you might have somebody coming up to you in the street, you know, a year later or 5 years later, and talking about something that you did that you can't even remember that you did, that made a big change in their life. And I remember a student that I taught in high school who then found me at Monash because she was doing a law degree at Monash, and saying that, you know, the discussions that we'd had in class had really inspired her and had made a difference in terms of her own choices about, you know, what she was going to study. And, you know, it's those kinds of moments that you reflect on that, of course you set out to make a difference, but what that difference is, you're never quite sure, because everybody experiences that individually. So I guess I just wanted to acknowledge also those sort of intangibles in our work. And then as a researcher, I worked on a project with Kathy Smith and John Loughran with primary teachers around scientific literacy. And an outcome of that was a book that the teachers put together about their experiences of building children's scientific literacy. And what I really like about that is that those teachers came to claim their own knowledge and their own voice through that particular experience. That is quite different from what typically happens, in that teachers are told what to do by some other external experts because they always know better than what the teachers do. And this was a genuinely collaborative experience where ultimately the teachers were able to name and share their own knowledge, that, you know, we had worked together with them. So that was a more immediate example. But then I imagine that they will go on to have that kind of impact that I talked about with their own children that may not be immediately visible either.
Mm. One of the reasons that I really like to open these workshops by sharing a story is because there's been research by a neuroscientist called Professor Paul Zak, I think he works out of Harvard, on the impact of storytelling on the brain. And what he found is that when people listen to stories, oxytocin is released. So oxytocin is the feeling of, it gives you a feeling of connection, trust, and belonging. It's the thing that was released as we told stories around campfires. And so we've actually been evolved to be able to respond to stories in that kind of biochemical way as well. And I think in terms of thinking about communications, it's really important to think about the ways in which we can tell a story, because stories help build a connection to our audience and with the people that we're talking to. It makes our work more tangible and real. Like, you guys now know that I'm a refugee advocate and a photographer, and I managed to, for a brief moment in time, influence my mother-in-law. And it also means that an intangible idea can become really authentic and real, because it's told in that framework of a story. So I'd encourage you all, as we go into the workshop today and thinking about your communications in the future, to think about what are the stories that we can tell, and very tangible, very specific stories. So moments in time, give people a name, or even share a story about you, about your research, about why it is that you want to be a researcher. Because stories and storytelling are one of the most effective communication tools we have. And as researchers, you're bringing intangible ideas and making them very tangible and practical and real. So I would just like you guys for a moment to reflect both on the list of values. Can I get an idea of who did their homework? Yeah, some people did it. Yeah, okay, cool. If you haven't, go back and do it, but have a look at those list of career values, or the values that you have around your research and your career. And then think about, where are your stories in that? So where's the origin of your research? Where's the passion that you have from your research, or a moment in time, an impact moment, if you will? And just spend a little bit of time now, we'll give maybe 5 minutes, to jot down very specific stories that are aligning with your career, aligning with your research, or reflecting an impact that you might have had. And these are stories, so to give this a little bit of context, these are always great stories to carry over into whatever forum that you're communicating in. So today we're talking about working with the media, writing in plain English for non-academic audiences, and as well as media, social media, and writing in plain English. So these kinds of moments and stories are great. They can be case studies, they can be specific people with specific names, or they can be about you as a researcher. But this exercise can also carry across to keynotes, and can carry across in other areas that you're looking to communicate your ideas. So I'll give you guys about 5 minutes and to think about and reflect on those stories that you might have. All right, guys, how did you all go? Who's got a story to share with me? I'm going to go Jason.
Okay. Is it? I'm not sure. I got the thing right. Is it like one story, or like mention the 4 or 5?
You can just list them all and have
Okay.
have a hamper of.
I'll mention my list, and then I'll mention a story or
Yeah.
two. But I had my number 1 was impact, which is a very big thing. So I divided it into 2. One was more related to research and advancing the field, and I put there curiosity, learning, understanding. So there's like kind of a egoistic side of it, that is, I like learning myself, but on the other hand, doing it with others. And then helping people open up their minds. And that's the way I see my teaching, like trying to help people think differently about what they do and about the world. Then I had recognition from colleagues and students as another thing that I find important in my work. Collaboration slash mentoring also. And finally, one that I think is very important, but although I put it last, which is enjoyment. I really have fun and I enjoy doing what I do. And I think that's very important for me to keep that in mind and keep doing the things I like doing. And that's the reason I'm doing this job. And I don't know, I mean, should I tell you a few stories about these things? No, it's
what's a story that you've got that really demonstrates that feeling of impact through your research that you've?
Well, I mean, there's one that is very strange because it's not like directly through one of my research projects, but 2 years ago in the city of Buenos Aires, where I live, they had this proposal for a law to basically close all the tertiary teacher training institutions and create a new university to do teacher education. And these are institutions that were created in the 1800s, so very old institutions with a long history. There are 29 of them. And all of the rectors of these institutions got together with all the students to resist this. And I don't know why. They asked me if I could go into the legislature of the city to support them, like they could call in experts. So it wasn't specifically about my research, but I did a presentation there, like a 10-minute presentation that somebody got on video. I went all over the media, social media. And well, I think apparently a lot of, and then on the TV and everything, and people, apparently it had a strong impact on the law, that law being stopped. And eventually, like a new law that was much more reasonable came through. And it was strange, again, because it wasn't like I was doing research on that area, but my feeling was that all my effort of creating certain authority to talk about these issues through my whole research had helped for something good to happen. So yeah, that's probably my main impact in the real world.
I'm going to throw Andrea into this now, if she's there.
Yeah, sure. So,
Thank you,
no worries.
Can
So I
we see
guess
your
my,
face?
yeah, hang on. Here I am. Oh, the beanie and everything. So really, I guess my story's just beginning. I'm an early career researcher, so I'm not quite sure what the impact of my research is having just yet. But I guess when I reflect on my values, the big one that comes up is creativity and wanting to create resources and create something almost to leave some sort of like legacy or thing behind that can continue to be used when I'm no longer here, and really doing that in a way that comes about through collaboration with stakeholders on the ground who are telling me, hey, this is what I need, and then also of course scholars in the field. So my background is in psychology, and so I think my kind of spark was when I was sitting in class. I've been one of these annoying students that always ask why, And I remember in masters one day sitting in class, there was a lecture about all these issues with the assessment methods that we have in how we diagnose kids with learning difficulties. I'm just sitting there thinking, well, if we know that there are all these issues, then why can't we do it this way, or why can't we approach it in that way? And that kind of was the starting point of my PhD. Even I approached my lecturer, who then became my supervisor for my PhD, about these ideas. So yeah, I think that's kind of my story, just also being a practitioner, stepping into the academic space. You know, I see that things can be different, so why not try to create something and make it happen in the field? So.
Wonderful. Has anyone else got would like to share what they have came up with? Okay. Feel free to jump in at any time. And, you know, as things come up for you, pop them in the chat, and we can tackle the issues, the questions that you might have that come up. The reason that I got you guys to do the exercise around what's important to you when it comes to your research and your career is that my experience of working, and tell me if I'm wrong, but my experience of working with academics is you guys have a lot of work. Is that a fair comment? You're juggling teaching, you're juggling work, it's publish or perish, and there's a lot of pressure. And then you've got people like me coming in saying, hey, you should get on Twitter, or hey, let's do LinkedIn, or here's this extra thing for you guys to be doing on top of your research, on top of your teaching. But what I really hope that you get out of the workshop today and out of the exercise that we did is that communications can actually be serving your career and be serving your research when it aligns to your values and the things that you want in your research to do. So impact is always one that comes up a lot, that when I've spoken to researchers, and Jason has touched on this today, Laura has touched on this today, around, you know, you want your work to have impact, to be able to be making a difference in the world. And communications can really help amplify that. It can get more people reading your journals, your articles. It can get your research into the hands of the people who can use it: school teachers, politicians, policymakers. And when you do it well, it can really almost like supercharge all that effort that you do going into getting that research paper accepted. The other thing that that it can do is foster collaboration and conversation. And thank you, Andrea, for sort of talking about that idea of collaboration, because I think when, you know, when you're being a good Twitter citizen, for example, you can really see that collaboration and conversation that's coming out. It can be a really good tool. It can be brutal if you're in that brutal space, but my experience of academic Twitter is it is actually really collaborative. It's really a good way of having conversations with people you've got academic crushes on, because you can tweet them, you can like their stuff, you can say, I've just read this paper and it was great. So that kind of, those collaboration, that global collaboration and conversation can happen. And we see a lot of that going on in the faculty. For early career researchers, it can really increase your visibility and your influence. For people like Mandy, it can also support the researchers that are underneath. So I know one of the things that Marilyn does with her Twitter is to support up and coming women academics, particularly in early childhood, because it's a really emerging field. And so when she first started with Twitter, that was one of the reasons that she started, not to have her ideas spread far and wide, but to be able to support emerging research that's happening. And look, the other interesting thing out of that, just in referencing Marilyn, who only started a few years ago, is that she's also said that she's never felt more connected with the people that she's researching with. So having that conversation with early childhood educators for her, the social media work that she's been doing and the media work has been able to help her reconnect with the grassroots of her research and almost like reignite that passion. And you know, that point number 4 is that really good communications about research creates change. And I know that change in education is often slow and painful, as Mandy referenced last year at the Merck conference, but it can also be super fast, as also COVID showed us last year with the rapid switch to online learning. But if you're looking for to have that evidence-based change happening out in the world, the people that that can create that change, the politicians or the teachers or whomever you're doing the research for, they need to know about it, and communications can push that research out. It can also act as a bit of a campaign. You guys might have seen the Thank Your Teacher campaign that we ran alongside the research that Amanda Heffernan and Fiona was doing about teacher appreciation and teacher workload. That has just been referenced by the Minister in his initial teacher education policy white paper. So it really can, if you do it well and you do it in a clever way, you can really create that change that you're wanting to see in the world. So this is a little model that I've done. And I think one really good way to start in thinking about communications, if you don't want to get overwhelmed all at once, is to think about maximizing your research papers that you've got coming out. So you usually have a bit of notice, am I right, that when your research papers are coming out, I understand it's a long and laborious process that involves many rejections. And so it's a big deal to get something, finally to have that piece of research out in the journals. And those journals, those publications lead to conferences and collaborations, they lead to citations. It looks really good on your, you know, in terms of looking at your metrics as an academic. What I will then say, if you can come up with a clever way of maximizing that research paper that you've had out and turning it into an 800-word article, working with industry media, working with mainstream media, putting it out on social media and putting it out on your own platforms, it can also lead to those conferences, collaborations, citations, and progression. It gives you that visibility. And the good thing is you've already done all the hard work, but what you need is just to have that little additional, that skill of taking that hard work and turning it into an 800-word article. So, or working with the media. So what I thought we could do for the rest of this workshop is go through the kind of practical skills and ideas that come with being able to translate that research and those research papers, or even conference presentations, into something else, so that you're not just getting one bang for your buck, you're getting this kind of multiple hits that are leading to more citations and, you know, more people accessing your article, but they're also leading to people who can't access your article to be able to understand the essence of your research. So the first thing that I will kick off with is simplifying your message. Now, simplifying your message is a really smart move, but it doesn't mean dumbing down your ideas. It just means that you're making them more accessible to people. So I have a little bit of a, and I know that if you're working in the academic world, you're working with very complex ideas. You're thinking very deeply about a lot of this work. And so it's a bit counterintuitive to come and say, okay, well, how do I take my 80,000 word thesis and turn it into 3 key ideas? But it's a skill that you can learn, and I'll take you through the way that this is one way to kind of land on your key messages and your key ideas. And this comes from my work in social justice, in refugee advocacy, and working at organisations like Oxfam. So it's it's an activist-based approach. There are other ways of doing key messages, but I find that answering these 3 questions can really help you land on, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 simple sentences. to capture your ideas. The first thing to really think about before you even work out the answers to these questions is, who do you need to communicate with? Who is your primary audience? And so whenever you're going out to do a piece of communications work, that'll be, that's the first thing to think about. Who needs to know about this? Who do I want to communicate to? And then try and be of service to that audience. So in the case of Marilyn Fleer, her key audience was early education educators, early childhood educators. And so we knew that we needed to use words and language that would resonate with early childhood educators, but also acknowledge they're not the people that are on Twitter. They're usually on Facebook, but they don't like to be public. So really, once you've got that key audience, you can go, okay, well, how am I going to reach them? What's the best platform to reach them? For you, Andrea, lots of psychologists and lots of school leaders are on LinkedIn. For the Centre for Youth Policy and Action, whose acronym I can never remember. I'm so sorry, Loren. You guys are wanting to reach policymakers and politicians. So for you, a really key channel is Twitter, and a key channel is media. So it really just depends where you're going to land in terms of who do you need to communicate with. School teachers, for example, are very, very busy. They're on Facebook, but they don't like publicly commenting on things because they guard their privacy a lot. So you might need to be kind of conscious of that when you're thinking about, well, how do I communicate with school teachers? But we do know school teachers like to do PD. So maybe you can do it through PD, or creating resources for them that can be contributing to their PD. So that'll always be the very first question. If you come to me, say, hey, I've got this piece of research, I'll be asking you, who is your primary audience? And you can have a secondary audience, but a primary audience is a really good way of like making sure that your communications are effective. So this is how I tackle it. What is the problem you are trying to solve or have solved? What is the solution that you have found? And what action do you want people to take? So people can get a bit stumped on that third thing, that action you want people to take. But that is saying, when I give the information to the audience, what do I want them to do with that information? So when I was working at Oxfam, we ran the Close the Gap campaign. And the action that we wanted the audience to take was to sign a petition. So we always made sure that in any media or any piece of comms that we were doing, that you can sign the petition here. So just think about, and an action can be thinking more deeply about an issue. It doesn't have to be click on the link and sign a petition. If you're wanting to influence systems change, for example, communications that you might be doing, the action you might want a policymaker to take is to just think again, or to just have one key idea stick with them as they move forward. Laura, for the work that you guys do in HBE, and if your audience is HBE teachers, for example, the blog that you wrote about fitness testing, an action that you might have been thinking about for those HBE educators who are doing fitness testing is, oh, is there a different way that we can do this? So that's the action that you're wanting your audience to take with the information that you're giving them. So I've got on the next slide an example of the work that we did with Marilyn Fleer at the beginning of at the launch of her conceptual play world. We don't know enough about the best way. I can let you guys read it. The best way to teach STEM in early childhood. Evidence shows early childhood educators don't feel confident when it comes to teaching STEM. So those are the two problems. We don't know enough, and teachers aren't feeling confident. Then the two solutions, they're going to follow the experience of children over 5 years and build a model that will then change the quality and quantity of teaching STEM. And then the final thing, which is the action, early childhood educators can be involved, find out how at our website. So the action is go to our website and become more involved. Because of the focus on early childhood educators in this piece of comms work that we did with Marilyn, we never referred to her as laureate professor, because that's really intimidating. And we knew sort of from talking to early childhood educators that, oh, I can't talk to a professor. They knew Marilyn from the textbooks. So we actually always called her Marilyn to make her more accessible. So it does go through, there's a whole bunch of considerations to make. So problem, solution, action. 1 or 2 sentences, very plain English, because you want this to be able to roll off the tip of your tongue. This is the work that you do in preparation for media. It's the consideration that you make as you sit down to write a Teach Space article. And it's also the consideration of the kind of the key ideas if you are going on to Twitter or LinkedIn that you're going to be talking about all the time. So you're not a scattergun. You're not talking about everything and everything. There is kind of like, they're almost themes that you would come up with. So what I want you to do is we have a look at the next slide. For a piece of research that you're working on now, identify who is your primary audience and what are the key messages that you have for your research. So problem, solution, action. We'll go back to the previous slide so you can see examples of what we did for Marilyn. Now, I think, Kathy, you're there. Let's see if she pops up.
Yes, I'm here.
So you guys have a very specific kind of audience that you're trying to reach with the centre. So could you just like talk a little bit about that audience?
So I guess, I mean, that's a really good question. And it's a policy centre. So we are interested in our message reaching people who are involved in the policy cycle, which is really, you know, lots of different types of people, and also in kind of creating an evidence base that might support change or improvements in that area as well. So it can be other kind of academics or other people in this same kind of space as well. So but you know, it could be broader as well. I don't have a clear answer for you.
So just in thinking about what's something, so policymakers and politicians are often people's key audience. It's often an area where you're wanting to influence policy for many researchers. What do you know? I can tell you a few things. What do you know about politicians? Like imagine how they would get information.
Yeah. I imagine that they're busy and they need very like information that's very kind of consumable. I.e. not the way we academics usually write.
Okay. And I would also, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say something that it's kind of like already primed to be of interest to them as well. So a bit of research about what they're doing. Yeah. And
they're going to want the research to be legit as well.
What do you mean by legit?
Like it's not something that you Googled. Right. They want it to be credible from a credible source. So coming from Monash is a really important part of communicating with that audience. Who online has an audience of teachers? Laura, what do you know about teachers in terms of how they would consume and get information?
You know, same as the previous responses, very busy. They essentially need to know the 3 points that you've raised earlier. The video, especially the Elizabeth Murdoch College video that you put together for us, I would say has probably had the most impact in combination with the Teach Space article on fitness testing.
Yeah.
For the reasons, you know, they're short, they get straight to the point, there's no fluff, but it's very clear about the intention of both of those examples. Yeah.
So one of the other things, again, that credibility is important. Teachers are going to want to know that the source that the information is coming from is credible as well. The other thing is that we know that teachers have a lot of inputs. Like they have a lot of demands on their time. So if you make it easy for them, and that so what am I trying to say here? I think what I'm trying to say is that particularly for your audience, Laura, but for all audiences, if you can think about how can I help? How can I be of service to this audience? What is the way that I can support them with the knowledge that I have? And what is the way that I can produce content for them that is going to be helpful and useful? It's instead of pushing information at them, you're actually you're being of service to them, right? So once I gather my bravery, because I know that putting yourself out there can be kind of quite intimidating for you, I'll be writing a series of LinkedIn articles. And one of them will be for academics. So I will be thinking about you guys as a key source as a key audience, and then doing problem solution action, probably on my LinkedIn. So it's really important to think about that audience first. Think about how you can be of service to them. Answer the question, why do they care? So this is a key question for the new centre. Why do policymakers and politicians care about the work that you're doing, or care about the youth barometer that's coming out? And then you can think about, okay, well, what are my messages and how can I shape those messages to be of service to that audience and of interest to that audience? So have a go. It can be quite helpful with these exercises to write by hand because you're accessing your brain in a different way. Think about a bit of work or research that you're doing and try the problem solution action model. So what's the problem that you're trying to solve or have solved, or the reason behind your research? What have you found? What's the solution? And then the action. So I'll give you guys 5 minutes and we'll take these problem solution action into our next exercise, which will be getting used to talking with the media.
Lara, would you mind putting the one before, the slide before, so we can see the 3? Thank you.
All right, guys. I'll bring you back. And would someone like to volunteer problem solution action? Gloria, do you want to have a crack?
Sure.
Oh, I thought Gloria.
Oh, Gloria, I had Lara. I was like, I am getting some
You
air
go.
time today.
You go, Laura.
No, all yours.
Go ahead, Gloria.
Did you say my name, Laura? Gloria or Laura? Gloria.
Gloria.
Gloria, yes, that's better in Spanish. Well, I think my main area of research and the things that what I have been developing, thinking about young children is, I guess, developing an understanding of a range of emotional repertoires of young children. So I think from a contextual cultural perspective. So with educators, their emotional well-being. So I'm also moving into that area. But I guess my problem is that we don't know enough about how to respond to children's range of emotion. And it's quite simplistic, I guess, that children get to learn, or how teachers and even parents define, you're happy, you're sad. So that has been, since my PhD, one area, and I'm moving into the dark emotions as well, like grief and grieving. And the solution, I think, the knowledge about how I don't know if I have a solution, but in my research, I guess, teachers developing compassionate approaches and affective, I call it affective pedagogies or approaches. So how to respond to these emotions. So these different pedagogies for these, and that are cultural and contextual as well. And I guess the action is practical resources for children, educators, which I haven't done, I guess, in an academic level, but practical resources for children, and even young children, little children as well, not only older children, but infants and toddlers. Practical resources for children, educators, and family to understand this range of emotions and how children communicate them and not silence them, giving the right to children to do this. So that's what I did. Thank you.
So Gloria, your audience I'm getting is early childhood educators and
Yes.
early primary school teachers.
No, early childhood teachers. So my work is very much with infants and toddlers, but also in the 0 to 5, I guess.
Okay.
So early
So
childhood
preschoolers.
teachers,
Okay. So
infant, toddlers, and preschoolers.
So thinking about then, if you imagine that you're talking to my Megan, who was my daughter's kindergarten teacher, who I love to pieces. And she's an educator of 20 years, and she's very switched on. And you can like take someone that's like almost like an avatar and imagine that you're talking just to them.
Yeah.
So in terms of a problem, you might say, and I'm just like riffing here, I don't know your research well enough, but children have a huge range of emotions, and we don't always respond with enough. We don't always recognize the complexity of what's happening in little minds or young minds. So I want to be able to support teachers. I want to be able to support educators in their kindergartens and childcare centres to be able to respond with compassion or be able to understand the most effective ways of supporting their students, their children that they're working with. And then an action might be, so if you're doing a piece for Teach Space, it might be, here are 3, read this article.
Okay.
Or here are 3 key ideas to take away.
Yeah.
I wasn't completely eloquent in getting those messages, but what I'd like you to do is go away after, this is for all of you, and this is an open invitation, to think about your problem, solution, and action, to write your words out and send it to me, and we can work on them together after the workshop. because I'm just kind of, you know, trying to do it on the fly here. But I will say, if any of you send me messages that say pedagogy, you're all dead to me.
Yeah, no, I try to avoid that now.
It's a banned word.
I guess, I guess, the three key things are helpful. Yeah.
But just to say, like, pedagogy is one of those jargon words that we tend to use a lot. But, you know, the most effective way of teaching might be a different way.
Teaching,
Yeah.
definitely.
Okay, so.
Thank you, Laura.
Okay, so Andrea says, my problem involves population A, but the action requires the help of population B. Okay, so Andrea, who's population A?
So population A are psychologists who say, hey, we don't have the tools to do this job well. And so the solution would be, okay, let's take tools that are originally developed for kids to try extend them on to adults. So the population B is, you want to call out to adults in the community to say, hey, come try out this tool so we can get a good sense of like the norms and how adults are performing on these tasks.
Okay.
So that we can feed it back to psychologists who are like, we need these tools to be normed with adults. So what do you kind of...
So who's your key audience?
The product would be, so the outcome that you'd want is like you create a product for psychologists to use. In terms of trying to grab the attention of creating the product, you need the help of adults in the community, those who can read well, and then those who struggle to read.
Okay.
You two.
So what you have is two different communications moments. So we'll go with the second one first. So what you've said is that you need the help of adults to contribute to resources for psychologists.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you're saying, well, what's the problem that you have to articulate to those adults so that they'll help you?
Pretty much we don't do a great job at identifying adults with dyslexia. So help us get better at that.
Great. So adults with dyslexia, we want to change. So adults with dyslexia don't get enough support.
Okay.
Yeah. Psychologists are looking to develop, this is the solution, psychologists are looking to develop a new set of resources to support them. And the action is, we need your help.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? So really clear.
Yeah.
And so what you're doing is you're appealing to, so your key audience will be people who want to be helpful. You know, primarily like, let me help this problem to support adults with dyslexia. One of the ways that you could get that message across really effectively is find an adult with who's been recently diagnosed with dyslexia. I can't even say it, and let them be the spokesperson. Make that the case study story that's driving that whole bit of communications.
Okay, that's where you weave in the narrative. Yeah.
So that's why I spent all of that time at the beginning thinking about, well, what are the stories that we can tell? Find the person who can articulate that problem for you from the community that you're trying to serve.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So Laura, your solution and action seem to be the same. Do you want to talk to me about that?
Yeah, thanks, Lara. I think I could use your previous example in that the action is just we need your help.
Yeah. So what's the problem? So who's your audience?
Health and physical education teachers.
And are they, so can we just define a little bit more your audience? Are they the health HPE teachers who, are they early career, mid-career or later career?
All.
Any?
Yeah.
Who's more likely to respond to your research, do you think?
Those who feel they have the power and autonomy to make some change. So yeah, mid to late.
So we're going to call them activist HPE teachers. Now, the reason that I'm drilling down a little bit more with that audience is it can be really helpful to be able to be quite specific about the kinds of people who are likely to take your research forward. So for an example is I worked with Lucas Johnson last year to produce a suite of resources for STEM, around STEM education. And we did a lot of work around who is the audience. And he was like, teachers. and then it's like, okay, well, people that might teach STEM or who are interested in STEM. And I said, well, are you trying to affect the teachers like the old dinosaur teachers who think STEM is just another fad? Because that was one of the topics of conversation. And he said, nah, that's just a waste of time. I said, well, who are the people that you want to be able to support with this content? And he landed on two. So he landed on like the STEM champions in the schools. And so we ended up producing resources to support the STEM champions in the schools to be able to get the STEM curious teachers over the line. So it was a really specific, and all of the decisions we made around the video content, the distribution, everything came around. It's like, okay, well, how can we support the STEM champions, convert the STEM curious, get the STEM curious to have a go? So for you, activist HPE teachers that have a sense of agency, how do you support them with the research? And that's going to, you'll be able to shake out your research into a suite of resources or articles or ideas or whatever to support them, because you're not going to get the really like the crusted on HBE teachers are like the crusted on dinosaur resistant STEM teachers, right? They're not going to change what they do. Doesn't matter how much you talk at them, right?
Yeah.
Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, there are exceptions, but yeah, generally.
Yeah. Okay. But if you get those people that are willing to have a go and have a change, okay. So thinking about your activist HBE teachers, hit me with your problem, solution, and action.
So three. Oh, Leanne has had her hand up for a while. I'm happy to just sit on this. I feel like I've worked through it, and I can email you if that's all right.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Lara, and also thank you, Lara. And so, yeah, I do have a little bit question. It's about, what actions, I still have similar to Laura's, question about what actions do you want people to take? So sometimes it's not like, simply one or two sentence combination and, elaborate what actions could be do. And then, so is it possible just saying, please read some, recently published articles or the books,
So
like,
who is your audience?
that is the problem. That's what I consider is if the audience is the early childhood educators, for example, and then it's hardly for them to read the books, taking a longer time, or even the articles as well. So that is my problem about what actions, and then how should we list, long list about actions can be moved forward. So that is something I just wondering about this.
So this is the one, this action, it's a different way of asking it is, what do you want the audience to do with the information that you're giving them? So
yes.
If you're wanting them to, that it could be try out this idea in your classroom.
Sure.
It could be reconsider something that you've been doing. It doesn't have to be like a hardcore, read this book for more information. It can just be, an action for our audience at Monash. One of our audiences is 17 to 18-year-olds who are thinking about becoming teachers, or 16 to 17-year-olds, sorry. And so an action for them might be thinking, teaching might be a good career for me. Like we might not even be wanting them to register for Open Day. So the action that we might be wanting is for them just to be a bit inspired about the opportunity of teaching.
Yep.
So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does make sense. It's something also even more, motivating or inspiration as well, and also to think about that. It's kind of advocating about this work even. Yeah. That is something we can think about. Yeah.
And if you're operating from that idea of being of service to your audience, It's like, well, what do you want them to, like, if you're being of service and you're helping them with new information, it's one thing that you want them to do with that information. It's not a list.
Okay. Yep.
You know, and if you can simplify it to that point, you know, for a politician, it might be know that we exist. Or know that I'm an expert and I'm happy to talk to you. Right?
Yep.
That might be enough, and it doesn't have to necessarily be articulated. Okay, so what I might do is move this forward a little bit so you guys can think about how it can operate in the media. So I know, Jason, you said you've done some media.
Yes.
Has anyone else had experience with media? Yeah. Laura, how was that experience for you?
Terrible. They totally twisted my words, and yeah, I fled the country eventually.
Great. So one of the things that this problem solution action messaging is really good for is making sure that you stay on message when you're working with the media, and it gives you that protection as well. So I'll go to the next slide and just talk a little bit about the different ways we can support you at Monash if you're doing media. We pitch your research. So you've got a research paper coming up or a conference that's coming up or something that's interesting. You can approach either Sash or myself, and we can pitch your research to media. And we can do that through either MCERA, which is the Media Centre for Educational Research in Action, and we're a platinum sponsor, or we do that through the Monash Media Centre. And so generally that'll be, we get a piece of research, there's something that's coming out, we'll look at it, see if it's got media potential, a media release is written, then it's pitched to journalists, they ring you up, you do some stories, you give them some quotes, and then it could be that will then get picked up. Say if it's in The Age, it'll get picked up on radio. So that's one way. Another way is that you write a plain English piece, and then that gets picked up. So a piece for the conversation on Monash Lens, for example, if it's got media worthiness in it, it can also get picked up, or it can get pitched from that plain English piece. So our PhD student, Danielle Hadransky, has just done a piece for Monash Lens coming out at the time that there's a curriculum review in history about whether or not they use the word invasion, talking about Indigenous history in Australia. So that's very timely, and that might make a really good opinion piece for media. The other thing is that we establish you as an expert. So what that means is that over time, you've done these plain English pieces. You're starting to see this with, say, Christine Grove and Kellyanne Allen, that if and some of the rest of the psych team, Emily Berger as well, that they've done these public-facing articles, and then they just get called up by journalists to have commentary on an issue that's happening. You can think beyond traditional channels with media, so it's no longer just like, let's get in the broadsheets or the ABC and that's all that matters. There's lots of other platforms that you can go with. And I would just say that, like, the big media stories that we've seen that come out require quite long-term planning. So the Thank You Teacher campaign that we worked on, for example, was about a year in the making. So where it's like a long-term piece of policy change or like a big change in public opinion that you might be trying for, when you're doing it as part of an overall campaign, it takes a lot of planning. So I'm just going to go now. I'll show you I'll put an example on about why you want to really think about what your key messages are. This is an example of expert comments that went out about NAPLAN, and they go out every year. So MCERA did one and Monash Media did one, and there were 4 or 5 academics that just submitted maybe a paragraph of information of what their opinion was about NAPLAN. I've included 2 examples here. Fiona's is 6 minutes long. So after this workshop, I'd encourage you all to have a listen to that and see if you can pick her problem solution and action messages. She's done this training. But I wanted just to show Vanessa's one. It's 2.5 minutes long. It ran on ABC, on SBS, and she's right at the end.
Well, after being cancelled last year at the height of the pandemic, Australia's NAPLAN tests have kicked off today in schools right across the country. 1 million students will be sitting the exams, which authorities hope will give them a snapshot of how students are progressing. But opposition to the standardised tests is growing, with opponents claiming NAPLAN is broken and should be scrapped. All lined up and ready to go. These Year 5 students from Strathfield North Public School easing into their first day of NAPLAN.
I think it was pretty good and I think it was really fun. I kind of enjoy NAPLAN because it kind of helps me.
Students across the country in years 3, 5, 7 and 9 are participating in the annual event, a staple of the school calendar since 2008.
I've always taught the kids in our community that it's about assessing what we're teaching and in terms of literacy and numeracy, and it's for us to see, what we're doing well, what we can improve in.
But some educators say it's NAPLAN that needs to be improved, arguing the tests are no longer fit for purpose. The Queensland Teachers Union taking a stand today, encouraging its nearly 50,000 members to withdraw their own children from the tests until it's reformed.
The Queensland Teachers Union and the Australian Education Union have had long-held concerns into the test in that it's not being used for what its original purpose was.
Many parents too making the decision to boycott, like mother Mary Dmitrievsky, who says NAPLAN doesn't accommodate for her son's learning style, essentially setting him up to fail.
It doesn't identify a child's strength, it doesn't identify their learning style, it's not flexible to accommodate how they can actually take the test, and it tells me nothing.
The federal government and the National Assessment Authority have long defended NAPLAN and its effectiveness, and given last year's test was cancelled because of the pandemic, they say this year's data is more important than ever in providing some insights into how Australian school children are faring.
There was such a diverse range of student experience last year across the country. It will give us a bit of a picture about the impact of COVID on teaching and learning.
Academics are aware there are problems that need to be addressed.
We've got plenty of research in the space. We've got plenty of people's opinion in the space. We've got people on both sides of the fence. But where's our dialogue?
As for the students, they're taking it in their stride. Amelia Dunn, SBS.
Okay, what did you guys observe about that? Could you hear me?
That it was very short.
Yeah, right? So
I actually saw, I was right there when I met Vanessa just before she was about to do that. From what I've seen, she talked much more and they cut it to 10 seconds, but she probably talked like for 5 minutes or something.
Yeah, so I think she was interviewed for 15 minutes. It took up a fair chunk of her day getting ready. And then she got a grab right at the end of the story for 10 seconds. And the reason that I wanted to show you guys that example is that you have to really stay on message, because they will, that if you've only got 10 seconds, mostly, if you get interviewed by the media, that will be shown in the public space. So it might be 1 or 2 sentences. If the Age are doing a story about NAPLAN, you'll be called on as the expert. You'll provide the comments, and then it's 1 or 2 sentences. In that media story, you've got that 1 or 2, you know, 1 or 2 grabs that'll come up. So you want those grabs to be really good. You want them to be on you as part of your key messages. And you want to try and kind of get your key messages into the responses within it, within the that you give to the journalists. One of the important things with working with the media is to understand what kind of journalists you're talking to. I mean, beyond the News Limited Murdoch versus The Age or The Guardian. But, you know, if it's, if you're being interviewed on the phone for a newspaper or an online story, that's a lot different to getting interviewed on Sky News Live. So if you're feeling nervous about talking to the media, if this is something that you're not sure about, you can ease your way in. You don't have to do the live Sky News television straight away. You can kind of ease yourself into talking to friendly education reporters. Mostly they're not going to be trying to trip you up or, you know, take your words out of context. But what I will say is that they're very busy, they're on deadline. And if you're asked to provide a comment, you need to do it pretty quickly. You can't just get back to them tomorrow or the next day. They're, you know, they're working to a publication deadline. So just be aware of that. And there's a whole kind of range. So there's like talking to a news journalist, providing expert commentary for online or print media. Then there's like pre-recorded interviews for radio journalists. There's live interviews for radio journalists. Then you're moving into TV. But always this problem solution action messaging that we've gone through today is a really good foundation for you to get prepared about what you'll do in those media when, you know, when and if the media ask you to provide commentary. If this is an area that you're interested in, there's a couple of outlets for you to have sort of some in-depth media training. We don't have time to do that today, but you can register your interest to do media training through the faculty or do the cross-channel training that Monash Central offers a couple of times a year, where they take you through what to expect. The other thing is that if you are approached to do media, we can work with you one-on-one to help you get prepared and practice those messages. And certainly I worked with Fiona and Amanda Heffernan and a bunch of other academics, George Varian, as he was doing his work to kind of get prepared in that space. So what I've got is a practice. I'll bring it up on the screen. So when you're doing, so we'll go back to the interview preparation. So these are just some really quick tips. Prepare your key messages. Be aware of the news that's going on in the space. Be really good talent. So short, sharp, not jargon. Be accessible and available. And kind of own your expertise. So I know in the academic world, your expertise is quite narrow, but in the world of the media, you're an education expert. So Gloria, you might be an expert in early childhood education rather than your very narrow focus. So be prepared. They might ask you about other research or they might go off topic to what they originally had asked what you would talk about. But you can say, well, there is research in the area that suggests X and Y. So you can talk about other research even if it's not your specific research, because I know that's tripped people up previously. Okay, so if we just go to 2 slides, I think. So this is something that you could do in pairs or with a team, with a colleague. Ask these questions, have your problem solution action messaging ready to go, and then kind of have a little bit of a practice around these questions. Can you tell me a little bit about your research? How will this be useful in the real world? What change would you like your research to make? And what would you say to people who say this kind of research is a waste of money? Just to get you prepared in case there's a little tricky question. Whatever the question that comes up, you can kind of stick it in your problem solution action framework. Okay, so we'll move on. Okay, so there are a number of different channels at Monash. I've referenced them previously. There's the Monash Education Teach Space. I edit that. So we're looking for plain English articles for teachers and school leaders. I know Laura's written for that before. And we advertise that on social media. So last year, I think we had 100,000 views on our articles. So it's not chump change. And it is a really good way to translate research findings for teachers. Have you guys seen Pretty Woman? There's a line in Pretty Woman where she's, Richard Gere is kind of doing the whole seduction thing with the strawberries and the champagne. And she says, this is all very nice, but I'm a sure thing. So I'm kind of your Julia Roberts here. Like pretty much if you pitch me a story for Teach Space, it'll get up at some stage in there. So like you don't need, it's not like an academic journal that's really, really hard to get published in. You can just pitch an idea. I'll help shape it, and then we can get it up and published. I'm getting funny looks from Grace, and maybe that wasn't the best analogy to go with. There's Monash Lens, which is also quite Julia Roberts-like, if we kind of take this embarrassing analogy and extend it a little bit further. They take more opinion pieces, and their audience is much broader. So they're kind of, it's like a thought leadership platform. It's like Monash's version of The Conversation. So Jason, I think you've written into that. I know you have because I helped you. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, it was nice. It was a nice experience. It's always difficult to do the kind of thing you're suggesting of putting our ideas into simple language. And I'm very picky about simplifying the ideas too much, because I think usually my work is quite very conceptual in many ways, and I'm always scared of like ended up doing something that is so diluted that it doesn't really make sense. But I don't know, with your help, I think it worked quite well.
I think one of the other things that I will say about simplifying your ideas, it's actually an act of kindness for your readers as well, because we're not academics. We don't think in that very deep way. And I know that if I come across a piece of academic writing and I don't understand it, I feel stupid. And I'm sure as educators, none of you want to make people feel stupid because they can't understand what it is that you're talking about. So that's that idea of service as well. You don't want people to be, to be feeling stupid that they can't understand these complex ideas. So it is kind of up to you to, like Einstein said, it takes a genius to make something simple. Other platforms, industry blogs. I know, Laura, you've done some of those. I think that'll be, I think The Conversation will be a particularly interesting channel for Loren, for your centre, because that is quite newsy and quite timely. And you can also write your own articles on LinkedIn. So you don't have to wait for these platforms to publish. Increasingly, LinkedIn is being used as a publishing platform, and it is actually super helpful. It's an area that's growing. The organic reach is really good on LinkedIn at the moment. It's kind of like where Facebook was maybe 10 years ago. The algorithms are very friendly to new content. So if you're wanting to get ideas out, particularly, like I said to you before earlier, Andrea, to psychologists, they're on LinkedIn. So that could be a way of thinking about it. Equally, for the CPAP people, if you're wanting to reach young people, I know that's not your primary audience. There are lots of young people who are on LinkedIn who are trying to get jobs and thinking about their careers. So, LinkedIn might be a platform to be thinking about. So here are my tips for writing in plain English. 1 idea per sentence. lead with the main point, use active voice, and unqualified language. So pretty much what I'm saying is write in the exact opposite way to an academic paper. One of the things I do with TeachSpace when I get it is I do a word search for could, would, may, and should. And I just take those words out of the article, because you don't want people to think maybe, yes, no, you just want your language to be clear, concise, and active. And leading with the main point, that's the hook, that's the news grab. And we'll see in the next slide why that's so important, because primarily if you're writing articles on the web, people scan read in the shape of an F. So they're reading the headline and the intro text, then they're skipping down on the subheadings, and they're seeing if that's an interesting enough article for them to read, and then they'll go back and read it. Usually you have about 5 to 8 seconds to get people's attention. So you want that big, meaty, interesting news hook piece right in the top part of your article. If you write for TeachSpace, I'll often rewrite your heading because that's in thinking about SEO. So I've just published a piece from Claire Hall about teaching, including Indigenous languages and perspectives in the music room. And so we deliberately put Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in the intro so that it would turn up in Google searches, because people aren't necessarily searching at the moment for First Nations as the term. And visuals are important. So if you've got a research project, so Laura, that one that you referenced earlier, with the University of the Third Age and the primary school kids, we got great images from it. And so the images can actually drive the story and bring your ideas alive in a whole lots of new ways. If there's a video, that's even better, because people have 90% retention from video as opposed to 10% in text is the stat that I think I saw. So I'd encourage you all to have a look at TeachSpace. I've got an exercise which I'll send through to you on the next page, which is, that's the copy that I got from the beautiful Stella Laetis, still quite academic. And I'd encourage you to have a go, have a look at TeachSpace, and then try and mimic that to write simply and in plain English. And that's the version that we came up with, but I won't give you that straight away. But you can see the difference in the length of them. Okay. So social media, in our last little bit. Twitter is a public forum. It establishes you as a thought leader. It allows you to be supportive and collegial. And LinkedIn is a cultivated professional network. And so both of those are platforms and channels that you own. The other thing is, in the research that's been done in the world of fake news, academics are trusted and respected. And so it's really worth you guys thinking that you're doing a service to the audience by putting out these kind of evidence-based research stories into the world. I've got a workshop on Twitter in a couple of weeks, which I would encourage you to attend. But this is how you can get started and you can grow. And that idea of how can you serve your audience is so important on social media, because it means you're not just talking at people, you're talking with people, and that you're being of service to the people that you're trying to communicate with. I have sent you through some links here of some of our top tweeters within the faculty. And if you're looking at getting started on Twitter or upping your Twitter game, you can have a look at those. There's an exercise there for you guys to work with. And if you're really, really well and truly getting started, this is what I suggest that you kind of have a look at doing. It does take time and it does take commitment. But I've seen some really tremendous results coming out of academics getting involved with Twitter and getting involved with LinkedIn grants, keynote invitations, all sorts of different things are coming out from people being involved with social media. I know I've skipped through that last part, but have you guys got any questions? No? The CPAP people, are you all going to be tweeting individually?
I think a combination, Lara, but we do have, yeah, Loren's managing a central Twitter account,
yeah.
Which I think will interact with the personal accounts of all of us.
So I think one of the things that's really important for all of you is to start to develop your own profiles just as much as developing the CPAP account, because people aren't, I mean, the CPAP account needs to be there. It's a credible source of information, but people are interested in hearing from people, not institutions. And it's much easier to have a personality as a person rather than a centre. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that it's also really important for you guys to be able to kind of establish your own voices from within that centre as well. And, you know, I think the Q project has started, you know, that's starting to get traction, but you also will have to just be super patient because it does take time to get that traction, particularly in that new space. But you're all experts in that space. So you kind of need to own your own personality and have your own channel, as well as feeding into the CPAP channel, because one account from one new institution won't get the traction that you're looking for in terms of that research. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Has anyone else got any questions? Okay, well then we might wrap it up here. I will send you the worksheets to work through in your own time. And I look forward to getting your key messages that you work on and helping hone those. So communication channels are open. Send me your Teach Space ideas and articles, and I will see you all very soon.